A miniature wax figure of George Washington requires a surgeon's precision to get the tilt of the head just right. It's an act of devotion, described in a Smithsonian report from July 2nd, where an artist recreates a famous revolutionary scene to keep the founders' virtues visible. Something interesting emerges when that image is placed against an essay published yesterday. Writing in The Atlantic, Annie Lowrey tracks the movement of American wealth from the millionaire planters of the 1700s to the arrival of the first trillionaire. It's worth pausing on the gap between these curated icons and the systemic realities of concentrated power. These stories reveal a country caught between its oldest myths and its newest, most staggering scale. John Trumbull spent 30 years obsessing over the faces of the founders, even when he got the room's layout and the signing dates all wrong. In this piece from last week, the writer looks at how that sane impulse for portraiture led to a massive wax diorama, now resurfacing at the National Portrait Gallery. Notice the way Bartlett M. Frost's 1960s waxwork was designed to turn these men into permanent icons of national character.
To recreate one of the American Revolution's most famous paintings, this artist painstakingly crafted miniature wax figures of the nation's founders. Bartlett M. Frost's diorama is modeled after John Trumbull's depiction of the presentation of the Declaration of Independence. Newly conserved, the work is now on view at the National Portrait Gallery. When the American artist John Trumbull set out to create a painting commemorating the Declaration of Independence in 1786, a decade after the signing, he wasn't overly concerned with historical accuracy. The event depicted in Trumbull's work is the presentation of the Declaration by its authors, the Committee of Five: John Adams, Roger Sherman, Robert R. Livingston, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. These men drafted the Declaration together, with Jefferson serving as the text's primary author. Contrary to the painting's title, The Declaration of Independence, July 4, 1776, this meeting took place on June 28, 1776, and some of the individuals shown weren't actually present during the relevant session of the Second Continental Congress. The layout and look of the room are also wrong, from doors in incorrect locations to embellishments that suggest the space was elegantly decorated. Instead of recording the events of the summer of 1776 as they happened, Trumbull sought to accurately represent the faces of the people involved, hoping that realistic portraits of the founders would inspire viewers to embrace the noble virtues that these men were believed to personify, says Robin Aslison, a curator of prints and drawings at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, NPG. 36 of the featured individuals sat in person for Trumbull, who fine-tuned their likenesses over 3 decades. Today, Trumbull's original painting is housed at the Yale University Art Gallery. A larger and far more famous version that he created between 1817 and 1818 adorns the rotunda of the United States Capitol. In 1968, NPG asked diorama maker Bartlett M. Frost to recreate Trumbull's scene in a different medium, wax. Staff knew that they wouldn't be able to borrow the monumental Capitol version, so they wanted to find another way to honor what was seen at the time as the most important representation of an American history event, Aslison says. According to Aslison, Frost's large-scale diorama went on view at NPG in 1969. It was also displayed during the Smithsonian's 1976 bicentennial celebrations, but eventually ended up in storage, where it was forgotten for decades. Now, as the U.S. prepares to mark the 250th anniversary of the nation's founding, Frost's diorama is returning to the spotlight. As a work based on a painting that was made for the 10th anniversary of American independence, Aslison says, the scene, quote, documents the various ways that Americans have celebrated and commemorated this important event at different historical junctures. The 1.5-foot tall, 4.5-foot wide, and 3-foot deep diorama is now on view in an ongoing NPG exhibition titled Out of Many, Portraits from 1600 to 1900. Newly conserved with financial support from the Collections Care and Preservation Fund, the diorama is accompanied by an enlarged detail from Trumbull's painting that highlights the 5 delegates at the center of the scene. Did you know? The signing of the Declaration of Independence. Trumbull's painting is often misidentified as a portrayal of the signing of the Declaration on July 4th, 1776, but the Declaration wasn't signed on July 4th.
Most of the 56 signers only put quill to parchment on August 2nd,
nearly a month after the document's adoption. Several signed even later. Long overlooked, Frost's diorama was in need of a complete conservation treatment, Asleson notes. She says that conservator Stephen Pickman was excited to take on the task of reattaching arms and legs, toppled chairs and tables, and missing feathers from quill pens. He really took a deep dive into the way that those figures were made. NPG staff also devised a motion-activated LED lighting system that encourages visitors to appreciate the intricate details of Frost's figurines. To craft the scene, Frost created wax sculptures modeled on the men in Trumbull's work. A second diorama artist, Charles E. Plasto, also contributed to the project, possibly working on the setting and armature. Frost started the process by pouring wax into plaster casts, then peeling the plaster away and inserting wire into the figure to reinforce it. Next, he began scraping, lifting out, rounding, smoothing, until the wax figure became a 4-inch replica of the desired character, the Christian Science Monitor wrote in 1969. The diorama maker applied color with a brush before adding imitation pearl eyes, hair trimmed from goat pelts, and handcrafted clothing and shoes. At first glance, Frost's diorama is almost indistinguishable from Trumbull's two-dimensional painting. Upon closer inspection, however, viewers will be able to discern the true nature of the work. The three-dimensional box actually recedes into space, diminishing in size, Asleson says.
The wax founders in the foreground are larger than those seated in the background. At the very back of the scene, some figures are simply cut out of metal and painted, yet they look as real as the sculptures in front of them. Any attempt to make realistic, lifelike figures with personality, must eventually go beyond craftsmanship, Frost wrote in a 1960 essay. The best diorama figures will only look like stiff little mannequins, unless we plan them with human behavior in mind. According to the Christian Science Monitor, Frost expanded on this philosophy by telling a spectator that if I can't get total realism, the whole thing is futile. Described by a peer as the greatest dioramist in the world, Frost was the logical choice to create the model, Asleson says. Largely self-taught, he worked for the Illinois State Museum and the Detroit Historical Museum, crafting history dioramas for both institutions. If modeling historical figures whose appearances are well known, Frost wrote in his essay, then that is the face that must be done, or you will be defeated before you start. In instances when few or no likenesses survive, however, Frost encouraged his fellow sculptors to learn as much as they could about the person's actions, thoughts, and reputation, adding up this information to develop an impression or a conviction on how he ought to look. By associating the subject's recorded behavior with persons of your acquaintance, the diorama maker added, the individual becomes a definite physical personality in your mind's eye. Now, and only now, should you start the figure. Today, dioramas, whether taxidermy or more in line with the style created by Frost, have largely fallen out of fashion, with some observers raising concerns that they weren't altogether historically accurate, Asleson says. At NPG specifically, dioramas are rare, as portrait artists don't usually work in diorama form, although they do often work in wax, the curator adds. Two such artists are highlighted near Frost's diorama: Margaret Todd Wetton, who ran a safe house for Patriot spies, and Patience Lovell Wright, a sculptor who moonlighted as a spy for Ben Franklin by hiding messages in the heads of her wax creations. Out of Many also features a new gallery honoring individuals who laid the groundwork for American independence, including George Washington, Common Sense author Thomas Paine, and First Lady Abigail Adams. Reflecting on what she hopes visitors take away from the diorama, Asleson says that she wants children in particular to find it really exciting to press their noses up against the glass and feel like they're in the room where it happened, so to speak. She invites older museum goers to think about the different time periods referenced in the display, from 1776 to 1976 to today. The country's changed a lot, the curator says, and it's just interesting to see how one object can tell that story over time. Frost's Declaration of Independence diorama is on view in Out of Many, portraits from 1600 to 1900 at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery.
The writer for the Smithsonian describes a world where the Committee of Five is frozen in wax, their faces meticulously sculpted to project a specific kind of civic nobility. It's a vision of the American start that prioritizes character over the messy reality of the room's actual architecture or the dates on the calendar. But notice the name Robert Morris in the piece by Annie Lowrey. He was one of those founders, yet he also serves as the starting point for a very different American lineage, the country's first millionaire. Where the first piece sees a conservation effort to save a symbol of national character, Lowrey sees a policy trajectory. The interesting thing happens when these two views overlap. The diorama asks for a focus on the noble virtues of individuals, but Lowrey suggests that individual virtue is almost beside the point when the policy infrastructure allows wealth to scale, from Morris's mercantile ships to Elon Musk's rockets. It's a jarring shift. One piece invites a gaze at 1.5-foot-tall figures in a glass case. The other points to a capital class pulling away from the average family's 40% gains. The shared question isn't whether the founders were good men, but whether the system they designed was ever meant to contain the trillion-dollar outcomes it eventually produced.
Robert Morris migrated from England to the American colonies as a teenager and established himself in the mercantile industry. During the Revolutionary War, his trading ships attacked British vessels and seized their cargo. After the conflict, the founding father became a millionaire, likely the country's first. He later invested in frontier real estate, a good bet made too soon. Morris went bankrupt, spectacularly, and spent the years 1798 to 1801 incarcerated in a Philadelphia debtor's prison. 5 decades later, John D. Rockefeller took a $1,000 loan from his grifter father and used it to buy an equity stake in an agricultural trading firm. He made a fortune selling food and dry goods to the Union Army during the Civil War and pushed his gains into an oil refining business. By the 1910s, the Standard Oil baron had become the country's first billionaire. Last month, Elon Musk became the country's first trillionaire when his rocket, satellite, and telecommunications company, SpaceX, went public. Not just that, he became the richest person in human history, surpassing Rockefeller, Cosimo de' Medici, and the 13th century Malian emperor Mansa Musa. The moment feels unsurprising, perhaps inevitable. It took 100 years to go from the era of the millionaire to the era of the billionaire, and another 100 years for us to enter the era of the trillionaire. If Musk hadn't gotten there, someone else would have, thanks to the magic of compound interest, if nothing else. 20 individuals or families are worth more than $100 billion today, according to Forbes. Another 3,408 are worth more than $1 billion. Still, Musk becoming a trillionaire is not the product of a stable, long-standing trend so much as it is the product of a radical recent one in which the country's capital class has pulled away from everyone else. The number of American billionaires has nearly doubled in a decade. The net worth of the country's richest person has increased tenfold after accounting for inflation. And the average family's holdings? Those have grown a more moderate 40%. Wealth inequality is at a record high, higher than it was when protesters with "We Are the 99% banners were taking to the streets, and the president was referring to inequality as the defining challenge of our time. Inequality remains a defining challenge. It remains a problem America is failing to solve or even meaningfully address as the social and political consequences become more entrenched and more dire. The issue, to be clear, is not Musk himself. Say what you will about the guy, but he made his billions the way we would want any billionaire to make their billions. Advancing the technological frontier, greening the planet, buying a socially cancerous micro-blogging site, and somehow making it even more malignant. I jest. He lost money on Twitter. The issue is the policy infrastructure that allows people like Musk to become not rich, not super rich, but plutocrat rich. That policy infrastructure includes, well, where to start? The preferential treatment of investment income versus labor income, low taxes on business profits, arcane provisions that allow companies to paper over their net incomes, right to work laws, the allowance of non-compete clauses, the carried interest loophole, setting the federal minimum wage below the poverty line. The permissibility of debt loading and asset stripping by private equity firms, the creation of pass-throughs, which allow business owner-operators to shield their earnings from taxation, minimal levies on estates and gifts, weak antitrust enforcement. As globalization and technological change have amplified market inequality, Washington has not only kept these policies in place, but rejiggered them to benefit the rich even more. The top marginal individual income tax rate is a few percentage points lower than it was a quarter century ago, and less than half as high as it was in the 1940s and 50s. The top corporate rate is 14 percentage points lower than it was from 1993 until 2017. The amount you can leave your heirs tax-free currently sits at $15 million. When George W. Bush took office, it was $675,000. The United States does less to tamp down on inequality now than it did 15 or 50 years ago. It does less to hold down inequality than nearly any other high-income nation does. As a result, the richest are becoming far, far richer than the rich. The rich are getting much richer than the middle class. The not rich are getting nowhere. From 1989 to 2022, the amount of wealth a person needed to join the 1% climbed by $8.4 million, whereas the threshold to hit the median rose by $83,000. The share of assets owned by the top 0.1% climbed from 8.6% to 14.4%. The share of assets owned by the bottom 50% declined. In 2025 alone, the net worth of the country's billionaires increased by 22%, from $6.7 trillion to $8.2 trillion. Today, Musk is worth roughly 30% more than the country's 400 richest Americans were worth in 1989 combined. This concentration of capital is anathema to a thriving democracy. If money is power, Musk is now $5,208,333 as powerful as the average American household, and he has used that power to deprive children in foreign countries of life-saving medication and scientific laboratories of much-needed financing. In general, hyperwealth gives the hyperwealthy outsized sway over the country's laws, regulations, elections, tax code, and courts, perverting policy outcomes, destroying social trust, destabilizing the polity's sense of itself, increasing polarization, and ultimately destabilizing the political system too. The more unequal income distribution is in a democracy, the more at risk it is of electing a power-aggrandizing and norm-shredding head of government, the political scientists Eli Rao and Susan Stokes have found. And inequality isn't great for the economy either. It erodes human capital. It slows growth. The good news is that policy can undo what policy has done, helping the many rather than the few. The bad news is that people like Musk will be standing in the way.
The hand-painted faces in a restored diorama offer a version of history where virtue is static and small-scale. But the path from George Washington's land holdings to a trillion-dollar portfolio isn't an accident of character. It's a result of specific rules written into the law. When the scale of wealth moves from millions to trillions, the civic ideals captured in a glass case begin to feel like a different species entirely. What happens to the idea of a common project when the distance between a single citizen and the seat of power is measured in 12 zeros?